The night Adrian Keller stepped into the circus ring, he believed he was standing at the exact moment his entire life had been moving toward. The tent was full, packed with faces turned upward, their attention hanging in the air like electricity. Powerful lights burned down on him, making the colors of the arena feel unreal, almost dreamlike. Beneath his boots, the ground vibrated softly with the sound of anticipation. This was not just another show. At least that was what Adrian told himself. He adjusted the straps around his wrists with slow, deliberate movements. He had done this thousands of times before. Yet tonight his hands lingered slightly longer than usual. Somewhere deep inside him, a quiet sense of unease stirred, subtle enough to ignore but persistent enough to notice. Experience had taught him how to silence that feeling. Fear, after all, was part of the job. The crowd did not come to watch safety, they came to watch risk disguised as grace. As the music began, Adrian climbed. Each step upward pulled him farther away from the ordinary world he had left behind years ago. From this height, the audience blended into a single moving mass, their individual faces disappearing into shadow. This distance gave him clarity. Up here he felt untouchable, balanced between control and chaos. The higher he went, the more certain he became that this was the only place he truly belonged. He reached the platform and took his position. The cables stretched above him tight and shining under the lights. Adrian tested the tension with practiced precision. Everything felt mostly right. Mostly was enough. The signal was given and the mechanism engaged. His body lifted smoothly into motion, swinging through the air with familiar rhythm. Applause followed instantly, loud and reassuring. Confidence replaced hesitation. But then came the vibration. It was slight, almost imperceptible, traveling through the metal into his hands. Adrian's instincts reacted before his thoughts did. His grip tightened, his body stiffened. For a fraction of a second, the world seemed to hold its breath. He understood in that moment that something fundamental had changed. There was no time to correct it. The snap tore through the tent. The sound was sharp and violent, cutting through the music like glass shattering. Adrian felt the support vanish beneath him. Gravity pulled him down with ruthless speed. The lights above blurred into streaks as his body twisted in midair, fighting for balance that no longer existed. The applause collapsed into screams, distant and warped, as if coming from underwater. He tried to reach out to grab anything, but there was nothing. The ground rushed toward him, unforgiving and final. Impact exploded through his body, stealing his breath and his awareness all at once. Pain shot through his spine, overwhelming every other sensation. For a brief moment, there was only noise and darkness. When consciousness returned in fragments, Adrian was no longer in the air. He was surrounded by unfamiliar voices, harsh lights, and the unmistakable weight of his own body refusing to move the way it always had. The show was over, not with applause, not with triumph, but with silence and fear. In that moment, Adrian Keller did not yet understand that the fall had done more than break his body. It had quietly ended the life he thought he knew, replacing it with something he was completely unprepared to face. Adrian woke to a world that felt distant and unfamiliar. The sharp scent of disinfectant filled the air, and a steady mechanical beeping marked the passing of time. For several long seconds he stared at the ceiling, trying to understand where he was and how he had gotten there. When he tried to move, his body responded with pain instead of motion. Panic rose in his chest as he attempted to lift his legs, but they remained completely still, as if they no longer belonged to him. Doctors and nurses moved around him with practiced calm, speaking in low, careful voices. Adrian caught fragments of their conversation, words that carried more weight than he could process at once. Spinal injury. Severe impact. We need to wait. Each sentence felt incomplete yet terrifyingly final. He searched their faces for certainty, for reassurance, but found only controlled seriousness. No one promised anything. The days that followed blurred together. Pain became constant, changing in intensity but never fully disappearing. Medication dulled his senses, but it could not quiet his thoughts. He replayed the moment of the fall again and again, dissecting every second. The vibration, the hesitation, the choice to continue. Each memory felt like a question he could no longer escape. At first, people from the circus visited him. They brought flowers, awkward smiles, and words filled with sympathy. They spoke about recovery, about staying positive, about how lucky he was to be alive. Adrian listened, nodding when expected. But something about their presence felt temporary. As weeks passed, visits became shorter, then less frequent. Eventually, they stopped altogether. Rehabilitation began sooner than he expected. Therapists pushed his body carefully, forcing muscles to remember movements they had forgotten. Every small success felt insignificant compared to what he had lost. Standing required assistance. Walking required patience. The strength and confidence that once defined him were replaced by frustration and exhaustion. Nights were the worst. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by pain and dreams of falling that jolted him awake. During one session, Adrian caught sight of his reflection in a mirrored wall. The person staring back looked older, thinner, unfamiliar. For the first time, he allowed himself to acknowledge the truth he had been avoiding. Even if he recovered partially, the life he had built around the circus was gone. The air, the lights, the applause, none of it was waiting for him anymore. Months later, Adrian attended his first circus performance as a spectator. Sitting among strangers, he felt invisible. When an aerial act began, his body tensed instinctively. He watched every movement closely, noticing details the crowd ignored. The performance ended safely, met with thunderous applause. Adrian remained seated, hands still, understanding something with painful clarity. The circus had moved on, and whether he accepted it or not, so had the world. Adrian Keller's life after the hospital never returned to what most people would call normal. It settled into something quieter, heavier, shaped by caution and awareness. He moved to a small town far from performance halls and traveling shows, a place where no one asked questions and no one cared who he had been before. The anonymity felt strange at first, but over time it became a form of protection. Without expectations, he could exist without explaining himself. He found work repairing stage equipment for modest theaters and community venues. The job paid little, but it gave him something he desperately needed: control. Adrian inspected every cable, every joint, every locking mechanism with relentless attention. He refused to rush. He refused to compromise. People sometimes grew impatient with him, unaware of the reason behind his caution. Adrian never argued. He simply worked slower, more carefully, knowing that mistakes were rarely dramatic until it was too late. Pain remained a constant companion. Some days it was manageable, a dull reminder in his back. Other days it flared sharply, forcing him to stop and wait until his body allowed him to continue. At night, sleep came in fragments. Dreams returned him to the air, to the moment before the fall, when everything still felt possible. Waking from those dreams no longer terrified him. Instead, they reminded him that memory could not hurt him the way denial once had. Occasionally, news from the circus world reached him through articles or conversations he overheard. Accidents, near misses, performers injured, some permanently. The stories followed a familiar pattern: pressure, exhaustion, ignored warnings. Adrian felt no anger when he read them, only recognition. He understood now that the circus did not demand recklessness. It rewarded silence. Those who spoke up disrupted the illusion, and illusions were the foundation of the show. One evening, while closing a nearly empty theater, Adrian noticed a young technician rushing to finish a rigging setup. The movements were confident, careless. Adrian watched for a moment, then intervened, pointing out a small flaw in the tension system. The technician laughed at first, dismissive, until Adrian calmly explained what could happen if it failed. The laughter faded. The correction was made. Nothing dramatic occurred. No one applauded. But as Adrian left that night, he felt a quiet sense of purpose settle in his chest. Years passed. Adrian aged into his new life without ceremony. He no longer measured time by performances or applause, but by stability, by days without setbacks. One night, he stood alone in an empty hall after finishing a repair. The lights were off, the seats dark, the air completely still. He listened to the silence carefully. It did not demand excitement. It did not expect risk. It simply existed. For the first time, Adrian allowed himself to revisit the night of the fall without resistance. He saw it clearly now, not as a tragedy defined by loss, but as a turning point he had never understood at the time. The fall had taken his career, his identity, and the future he imagined for himself. But it had also stripped away the illusion that his worth depended on being seen. Adrian walked toward the exit, his movement steady, controlled. He no longer chased the air or the lights. He carried something else now: awareness, restraint, and a truth few performers ever learned while still standing under the spotlight. The crowd always remembers the spectacle. The circus always continues. But Adrian Keller remembered the moment when everything stopped. And in that stillness, he finally learned how to live.